So the state of church music, it's diverse, it's changing, it's multi-styled and yet multi-generational. I mean, it's all over the map. And I think about the literally thousands of churches that you eight represent collectively. And I would say this is a pretty good microcosm of what's happening in churches of all kinds. So I want to shift it to ask a follow-up. If that's the state of church music, whatever we've been saying for the last 15 minutes, how is the role of the church music leader changing as all of this is happening? So think about that role, the people that are leading ministry in these areas with our churches. How is that role changing as all of these other changes are happening? Anybody jump in on that?
Well,
Steve.
This won't be the most common answer probably to what you're asking, but one thing that I have a passion about, because I get so many calls from rural churches primarily, we don't have a worship leader, we don't have a pianist. And I would like to say, well, what are you doing to help build a worship leader in your church? Or how are you training a pianist? We actually have several churches in small settings right now who are paying the price to have students take piano lessons, or they have a piano teacher come into the church once a week and teach for free, and then they help students come to be trained. Now, in real life, probably those students are going to grow up and go to college and move away and not come back. But if you look at it from a kingdom perspective, what goes around comes around, and if we had more in the pool to be able to equip people, we would have more to be able to serve. Now, that's a small thing as a worship leader, but I think that we all should be about training the next generation behind us.
I hear that a lot, Steve, that one of the biggest challenges churches face today in music is leadership. People that can play it, can sing it, can lead it. Leadership becomes a real issue. So continue down that path, or to address the other question about the role as you feel led.
Mike, we're seeing that discipleship has to be an important, integral priority of the worship leader's daily routine. It's got to happen because Jesus said, go and make disciples. Yeah. And so that's our command. And often we get caught in the trap of just trying to get ready for Sunday, trying to get ready for Wednesday or the next rehearsal or the next worship service, and we don't put the time in, and it's costly. It is self-sacrifice of time, of pouring into not only students but young adults or new Christians, finding ways to show them how to grow in the Lord Jesus. And so our folks back home are learning that we've got to be absolutely on spot, thinking about how do we make disciples as part of the normal routine of a worship pastor in Mississippi. And I'm talking bivocational as well as full vocational. And we've got 600 ladies that are ministers of music back in Mississippi. They're doing this, and we're trying to be proactive about this because teaching discipleship equals teaching leadership. They become leaders as you pour into them, and they have to have experiences leading to become leaders. And so this is a slow process, but it's how you raise your next generation of worship pastors.
Yeah, we're not just leading music, we're leading people. And we're not just leading musically, we're leading spiritually. So let's chase that rabbit just a little bit. And all of you, we were talking about this a little bit ago. Let's say we're talking to the 20-year-old right now who feels a God call on their life. And they've got a music gift that they're developing. And they really feel like God's going to use them in vocational ministry to lead music and worship. What are the skill sets that they need to be thinking seriously about right now for God to use them effectively in those ministries? Paul?
I think one thing is you got to think past the platform. We've kind of chased an entertainment model, and you've got to think past the platform. It's exactly what Slater was talking about in terms of building disciples, which means I've got to think of what's happening in their life. How are the songs even that we're singing in worship building into their life as a disciple? What am I encouraging them to listen to? How am I going into those smaller groups and helping them to learn how to express their worship, even worship in a way that's going to come back into the larger congregation and help one another? So
I'm the 20-something that says, you know what, I already know how to sing, I already play piano, and I play guitar, and I'm even writing new songs, and I've got I'm building my theology. I've got a real good theology. I'm really preparing myself theologically. So I'm ready to go out and lead worship. What's missing from that profile?
This may go along with what Steve said too, but I would challenge that that young man or woman to ask the question, who is your mentor? Who is investing in you and spending time with you? And maybe to instill that lifelong understanding too is who then are you mentoring? So if they're doing both, they're getting it from lateral and top down and bottom up, then it gives it a better, well-rounded kind of aspect of understanding of how to prepare for the future maybe.
So John, you get that phone call probably pretty often from that Georgia pastor who needs someone to lead music and worship in their church. And what are they looking for? What are they looking for in someone to come be on their staff to do that ministry?
Well, generally they ask the right questions and they make the right statements. They're looking for someone that will take their people to a deep engagement in worship. That's what I hear most common. I think that sometimes they have a hard time articulating what that looks like. And so when that minister of music shows up on their field, at times pastors don't have a clear understanding of what that means. I think it's just important that the minister of music be very interested, you mentioned it, about theology, but not assemble the theology from bits and pieces from what they pick up here and there, but to develop a Christocentric theology that really takes them into the heartbeat of what worship is so that they can clearly articulate and run their practice through that filter. I think that pastors are trying to discover that themselves to a certain degree. And unfortunately, I think that at times our seminaries have thought that the worship and theology related to worship was to be left up to the minister of music and not invest in their pastors in the same level. And I would hope that maybe that curve could be changed, because I think pastors have really got to hold themselves or pastors or ministers of music accountable that whatever is done with a deep desire to reveal Christ in their worship and communicate Him clearly. I think at times that we tend to run down the latest and the greatest and take a look at what's on the top 10 rather than viewing what reveals Christ.
Yeah, well said.
And so I would encourage the pastor and the minister of music to think theologically as much as they do in terms of musical competency or how they look on stage.
With the landscape of music changing so much, and we talk about the diversity that's in music, what are the music skill sets that tomorrow's worship leader is going to need to serve churches well? Larry, you haven't spoken in a while. Get in here.
I'll do it. I hear from a lot of the younger folks when I'm talking with them that they're not going to have a choir, and that choirs are out. And I think there are things all over that are proving that to be untrue. That choirs are on the mend, on the upswing, and I think that's important. And so get that leadership training that you need to be able to do that. It's surprising the multiple times that I've talked with them and they have zero choir experience or don't know what to do in standing in front of an orchestra, and they think they won't ever need that. But how do we know what we're going to need?
Exactly.
I mean, we can never know that. God has put me in places that I thought I would never be, doing things that I thought I would never do. And I either had to learn it on the fly really quickly, or luckily God had led me in a path to get the experience that I needed in the training. And so, get the experience that you need. And that would be another thing, too, is just get experience. I have a lot of young worship leaders that will talk to me about, hey, help me find a job. I've got the degree now. And one of my first questions is, what experience have you had in worship leading? And I'm surprised at the number who will say none. And yet that's your calling. And, so get experience. There's so many of the smaller churches. Arkansas has a lot of smaller churches that would be open wide to an opportunity to have a student come in and lead and get the experience, and very gracious and loving on those students at the same time. So I would just encourage that.
Larry, I think that also speaks to our churches not intentionally giving younger generations the opportunity to develop in their ministries. We've got to be doing that. I'm grateful Slater, our mutual friend, Buddy Earwood, poured his life into me as a teenager growing up in that church. Bubba, you've got something on your heart.
And I was just going to say, to piggyback off what Larry just said, looking back over my experience in my part-time positions, when I was in college and when I was in seminary, I'm so thankful for those pastors that I served with in helping me develop my pastoral care skills. And that really, if I could just preach that to these students that are coming out, learn pastoral care, learn it's about relationships, and go from there. But musically speaking, I would also say in Kentucky, if you come to Kentucky, we'd love to have you, by the way, you need to be able to speak.
Shameless plug, but go ahead. Yeah.
You need to be able to speak organ stops and then turn right around and be able to speak guitar pedals, if that makes any sense. Because, again, we run that gamut. And in our ministries, we need to be able to speak that musical language
well said.
of years gone by and what can be relevant and then in the future. So I'm constantly talking that language.
Bubba, Paul Clark is standing on the Tennessee-Kentucky state line. He's not letting anybody out, so I don't know if they're going to.
The border is up.
The border is up. You know, it's one thing to choose not to have choir because you look at your context, the particular ministry of that community, and right now choir is not the thing that you should be doing for whatever reason. That's one decision if it's strategic. It's another thing altogether to not have choir because no one knows how to lead one. And so my addition to this comment is learn how to do it all. Music is not our message, it is our language. So learn to speak the language, learn every dialect of it, so that in any setting, if you're a missionary going to a foreign country that was speaking another language, if you're going to have very much impact and very long ministry, you're going to have to learn the language, and not just the language, the dialect of the different villages and places where you might go. Same thing's true in music. Know the language well and learn the nuances of it so that you can communicate with it at every turn. That's my thing. So this word, Steve, go ahead.
One thing to follow up on that, Mike, that same concept is true for your 30, 40, 50-year-old ministers of music too. So sometimes we use the excuse we don't want to do contemporary music because we don't listen to it. We don't know how to do it. We haven't become passionate about it. But if we took time to learn and do and be just immersed in it, we can do it. It's not something that a 20-year-old has the right to do by themselves. It's laziness sometimes, or lack of confidence on our part.
Thank you, Steve. John, you mentioned earlier about finishing well and how important what he was just talking about is to finishing well. Finish that thought.
Yeah, I think a lot of that goes right back to what people are saying around this forum, is that you have to be, I guess, best word, retooling all the time so that you can meet the needs of the constituents that you're serving. Remember that serving as a minister of music, it's all about putting your hands on the oars. You know, when Paul said that before King Agrippa, I'm here to minister and to be a witness in Acts 26. And that word minister is from that Greek word huerto, which means putting your hand on the oars, a nautical term. And I think sometimes as ministers, we think that we detach ourselves from serving. We have to do whatever it takes to move the ship forward.
There you go.
That doesn't mean we sell out our theology. It just means that sometimes we have to grow in our methodology to be effective for those that we serve. And if it means learning the guitar or learning how to communicate with a guitarist or a drummer, or like you said, learning the stops on the organ to appreciate that organist that's been playing for 40 years, then we do whatever it takes to help serve the congregation so that the whole congregation can engage in the most important thing that we have, and that is to worship God in such a way because of a loving relationship we have with Him. And so I would encourage us to make sure that if we're going to go the distance, then we have to be tooled for it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Slater.
Mike, I'm going to follow up what John said and just say we've got to constantly be learning, whatever your age is. If you're in worship ministry, continue learning, continue growing, continue engaging with new songs and new worship literature, and then make a determination if it's theologically sound, if it's contextually wise to use in your particular location. But we never stop learning and growing, and we've got, for instance, one thing that we could do to make disciples, to invest in people, is the gold ore deposit that we have all around us with our band programs in the schools. This is a great time for bands. Those kids go to your church. What do you do with that? Are you doing anything with band instruments or orchestral literature or some way they can lead? By leading, they become disciples. And so it is incumbent upon us as leaders to learn what to do with a baton, you've got to know how to handle that baton with a group of instruments.
You've got it in the wrong hand, for one thing.
Well, sometimes I go left-handed. And then what is, that's okay. It's a good state. Come visit. So what do you do with your different age groupings? In the church I'm serving right now, in our band worship team, we don't call it a band, we call it a worship team. With the choir, in addition, we have everywhere from an organist who's played for 55 years to one of my Ole Miss students who's about 19 years old, and we have every age in between that.
It's beautiful.
And we lift up the Lord together. But we try to use the skills that our people have from the congregation and use that to honor God in our worship.